Hi everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, What's Next for OpenStax Math. It looks like a few people are still joining, so let's give them a minute or two to hop on the webinar and then we'll get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started now. If you're just joining us, I was just saying thank you all for joining today's webinar, What's Next for OpenStax Math. Today we have with us Sharon North, who is a professor of mathematics at St. Louis Community College. She is also one of the senior contributing authors on our new Corec books. We also have with us Anthony Palmiotto, who is the editorial director of OpenStax. And they're going to talk a bit about co-requisite course models for math and the new resources that OpenStax will have for these courses. We did get some questions in advance of the webinar, but we definitely want to hear more from you. You probably have noticed, or you saw in the chat, that all attendees have been muted upon entering the webinar. That is just to reduce background noise so we can hear our host today, but we definitely want to hear from you. So if you have a question, just go ahead and throw it into the questions box, and we will get you an answer. And I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Sharon, who's going to speak first, and then Anthony will speak a bit, and then we'll have time for a more dedicated Q&A session.
Okay, thank you, Symphony. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. As Symphony said, I'm Sharon North. I'm a professor of mathematics at St. Louis Community College. I've been teaching college mathematics at the university and community college levels for, let's say, 30 plus years, and I'm always proud to include with that I've taught close to 10,000 students college math. So I'm really excited to be here today with you to talk about our co-requisite project with the OpenStax text. And I think I just heard my VacBot come on, so I might have to run out real quick here and turn that off. In addition to my teaching, I've had different leadership roles as a math department chair, a district math coordinator. I've sat on our curriculum committee, and I've been writing college level math content for over 20 years. So how did I get involved in CoRecs? I guess we can head to the next slide. And I am going to turn off my vacuum real quick. I will be right back.
Thank you, Sharon. It also just started pouring down rain here in Houston, so I will have some noisy rain in my background.
I am so sorry about that. He's scheduled to go off at 9 a.m. Okay. So in 2012, Missouri, where I teach, passed a House Bill 1042 requiring higher ed institutions replicate really best practices in remediation. And that's kind of how everything started for us. We were looking at the completion rates of college degrees in our state. And in my discipline, that means completion rates in college level math. So we formed state task forces on mathematics pathways and also on introducing co-requisite classes to each of those math pathways. And I sat on the math co-requisite scale state task force. A result of all of that work is our Core 42 initiative that I'm really proud of, that a student can transfer a whole 42-hour block guaranteed to any public college or university in Missouri. So let's take a look at our next, there you go. So as part of our state task force, we put together an implementation guide for co-requisites. We had people from all around the state who had been teaching co-requisites for many years and who made some really great recommendations. And so one of the questions that we got before the webinar is just, what is a co-requisite? So really, a co-requisite model places an underprepared student into a college level course directly with an additional support course. That is what a co-requisite is. So as opposed to a traditional developmental sequence, which could last 2 or 3 semesters, the problem with those sequences, while we provide a lot of help to the students, there are many stop out points along the way. And, these courses, of course, students, pay for and use financial aid for, but they don't count toward college degrees. So the faster we can get a student into a meaningful math pathway, and by that I mean something that relates to their area of interest or to their degree, the higher the level of persistence and the pass rates of those students. So actually I included a link to our implementation guide. I think that it could be really helpful to someone who's just starting out with co-requisites. We talk about the different models, placement strategies for students, resources for teachers, including open ed resources. And we do a lot of mapping. And by that, I mean really backwards mapping from each of those college level student learning outcomes, what support material needs to be covered so that a student can master that college level work. We recommend a just-in-time approach. So really, in designing the OpenStax project, I wanted to design materials that are linked directly to each of the 59 sections of college algebra and 79, I believe, for our algebra and trig. So I've identified really the learning objectives that students struggle with, that I've seen students struggle with over the years, and hitting them just in time so that a student can be successful in that college level course. So let's take a look at the next slide. Yeah, so really, I think some things to remember about this and that I've tried to keep in mind in terms of the project is that everything that is done in the co-requisite course is done to support the college level course. That is our main objective for the student to pass the college level course. We provide just-in-time support to those students. The communication between the co-requisite and the college level instructor is so important. In our model, I typically teach both the co-rec and the college level course. But last semester I actually taught a co-requisite for another professor teaching quantitative reasoning. So that communication is really important. We found that scheduling the co-rec directly before or after the college level course works really well. And we want active learning strategies to be used, including group work, but also hitting study skills and really building the math vocabulary. Co-requisite students struggle in many cases with vocabulary. So I've included a lot of vocabulary activities and exercises. And then, of course, training for faculty, advisors, and campus leadership is really integral to a successful co-requisite project. So here's our model. We use a blended co-requisite model. So we place students into a math pathway based on, as I said, their major or area of interest. And we have a introductory stats and a quantitative reasoning course, in addition to a pre-calculus with trig and a pre-calculus algebra course. And so we offer 2-hour co-requisites, and I mean by that 2-credit-hour co-requisites that meet 2 hours a week to support 3-hour college level classes. When I say a blended model, what I mean by that is my college level courses have both co-rec and traditional students enrolled. So our results have been very promising. Our co-requisite students are passing at nearly the same rate as what we would call a traditional college level student. Although we still have issues with placement and getting out the message and convincing students that they actually want to enroll in 2 math courses at once. Sometimes that's a hard sell. But really, in doing this work, I've seen co-requisite students then kind of take the lead in the college level course. I always include a preview of what's going on in the college level course in my co-rec class. And I think since those students have seen that preview, and you'll see from some of the materials I'm going to show in a minute, just a little bit of exposure helps them to gain confidence and take the lead in group work. So I've been using OpenStax text for, I guess this is year 5. I had colleagues at one of our other campuses who first introduced us to open ed resources. And when I first looked at OpenStax books, I was like, this is too good to be true. I love their, innovative approach, their high quality text. I really enjoyed Jay Abramson's pre-calcul series that I've been writing, these support materials. Barbara Olowski's Intro Stats is a really great book as well. And really, because I deal with students who struggle financially, our students just weren't purchasing their textbooks or courseware due to high costs. We were looking at $250 plus, and our students just couldn't do it. And so, really, this has helped us to level the playing field and really with their partners now, a student has an access to a text plus a really great courseware system for under $40. So I've gone to 100% of my students are able to purchase these resources. So if we look at the next slide, I think I have some of the mapping that I've done. So when Anthony first approached me about the project, um, I really felt that we need to lay out all of the learning objectives and what that maps back to in the OpenStax intermediate algebra text. So here's just an example, before, for example, you can hit the quadratic formula, you know, um, we need to make sure that students can solve a linear equation, that they understand solving, using the square root property, um, simplifying different, expressions. So I've kind of taken and mapped out. If you look at the column to the left, that would be all the college algebra topics. The column on the right side are the intermediate algebra topics and where they occur in the intermediate algebra text. So by section, well, chapter, section, and learning objective. Okay, yeah, so here's just so I had mentioned before that I have designed skill sheets to align with each of the sections of the OpenStax College Algebra. I'm nearly finished now with algebra and trig and working on pre-calculus. And so in each of these, I've picked one or two learning objectives that we really need to hit. And I kind of then do, a brief review, an example, and some practice. But I've also created what I call labs. So there's at least probably 2 labs per chapter of the book that are more, I'd say, a scaffold approach to the college level work, where I really talk students through that problem solving process and hit the vocabulary, hit applications, but in breaking them down step by step as well. So this is just kind of an idea of how they look and showing the learning objectives first and then the mapping to intermediate algebra. So if a student needs more work, that's exactly where they can go or where the teacher can go. And again, this helps with the communication between the co-rec instructor as well as the college level instructor, because they're working really on the same section. They both have resource materials to use. So in the next slide, I've also hit study skills quite a bit, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with the first chapter of OpenStax College Algebra because it's a review anyway, and I didn't want to map backwards from a review to an additional review. So what I've done is put together really 6 sections of study skill materials. And here is kind of an example of a self-assessment that I ask students to do, and then they get a score. They score their assessment. And then I ask them to reflect on, name 5 of these strategies you're currently using that work well for you, and name 5 that you want to try this semester. And I started off my summer stats class actually with the same assessment. And I think it's gone really well. I think the first week of class is a period that a student needs to reflect on their past mathematical experiences and make a plan for success. So that's what's going on here with these study skills materials. Now, in terms of, I had been asked before the webinar about, how has this evolved given that now I'm teaching remotely? And so I did want to address that. When I assign materials now in teaching remotely, and by materials, I'm talking about either the skill sheets or the labs or the study skill materials. I work in Blackboard, so each day I'll just say that I lecture during my normal class time in Blackboard Collaborate. And I also then use what is called the Create Assessment Assignment tool to put these materials into Blackboard so that my students can download them and have them available for group work, because in Collaborate then I assign them to groups. So I have my students do these in groups. They either type up their responses and submit it through Blackboard. I do have some students who print and handwrite their work and still submit it via Blackboard. And I now grade via Blackboard. And so it's actually working out pretty well. I'm really happy with the progress of my classes last spring. I was able to hold on to all of my students after midterm, and actually gained one back who had stopped attending classes because of transportation issues, and have seen a lot of success with my statistics students using this method as well. So in writing trig, I think our next slide, I've been working on these trig projects now for the OpenStax pre-calculus and algebra with trig. I don't have that intermediate algebra content really to back to. So what I've been doing is picking topics that I see students struggle with throughout trig and pre-calc and even in calculus. And I hit those in the skill sheets. And so here, is just an example of one problem when I talk about this scaffold approach that I would ask a co-rec student to do, So talking about identities related to the sum and difference formulas, as well as complementary angles. Um, Having them really do a 4-step identity with kind of the steps laid out for them will help when they come to my class and, my college level class and have to do an 8-step identity. Those co-rec students who have done that work are going to have a much better chance of hanging in there and mastering those topics after, kind of these more, supported kind of mini versions that I'm putting together in the labs. Um, let's, yeah, so let's go ahead and we'll go to the next one. And yeah, I just wanted to really thank the whole crew at OpenStax. Um, my students really love the OpenStax text. You know, um, it's just been a game changer in my classrooms. My students, as I said, appreciate that I use these materials. And as an instructor, it brings me just, great joy for every student to have access to a text and, to these lower cost coursewares that the OpenStax partners are offering. I hope that you'll look at these materials and think about them for your co-requisite class. Change them, make them your own. I think that's kind of one of the beautiful things about open ed resources, that it gives you somewhere to start and, add your favorite problems to them. Yeah, I did want to acknowledge 2 colleagues that have helped me in my work as well. Professor Rita Pernick and Daba Dow have been really valuable in seeing my vision and helping me to reach, some deadlines. And they're really creative and talented instructors as well. So I guess I'll pass it over to Anthony. Uh, unless we have other questions right now that I could address.
Thank you. Actually, we do have a few questions that are for you, and
Yeah.
then maybe Anthony can go after that. The first question is from Susan. She's wondering what the pass rate is for corecs in your experience.
Yeah, yeah. So, one thing I'll say that part of this whole uh, redesign and our state, signing up with Complete College America and working with the Dana Center is we started, I had mentioned a data-driven approach. We were looking at longitudinal data of our developmental ed students who started at our lowest level at pre-algebra. And I think when you look at a group of like 1,000 students who start in pre-algebra, nationwide, fewer than 20% actually then pass the college level course. And for our institution, I would say it was closer to 10%, which, to me as a former department chair and developmental ed coordinator, I knew great things were going on in those dev ed classes. It's just a matter of that student holding on for 3 semesters of developmental ed to get to the college level. So, um, our pass rates in the co-requisite courses, I'm thinking back, and again, I do have some relatively smaller classes, but I would say our pass rates are closer to 80% for the students who have those um, additional supports of 2 hours additionally a week with me helping them. So that's a huge difference from where we were before.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. We do have someone asking if you can give an example of a collaborative assessment that you assign to students to work in groups in an online environment.
Yeah. So um, you know, related to the class I'm teaching right now, my students right now had done some teaching stats this summer, and I write these kinds of labs and support materials for stats as well. And so, my students will get together and collaborate. I assign them to groups of traditionally like 4 students a group, sometimes 5, because then, a student will leave and I don't want it to be, just maybe 1 or 2, left there. So last week, our project was on creating confidence intervals. And I kind of talked them through the process of doing a confidence interval, giving them different levels of confidence so that they have to, go to a Z table and find, go through that process of finding their Z value. This week's lab, the one that I'll be doing tomorrow, is on hypothesis testing. And again, I'll break that whole process of hypothesis testing down into, the traditional 5 steps of, stating your hypothesis, your rejection regions, finding an appropriate test statistic, and then, either using the p-value or the rejection region to make a decision, and then just going ahead and coming to a conclusion based on it. So as I said, I'll put these out in the assignment, and the official name is assessment creator, I think. I looked it up for this, the create assessment assignment tool. And they, I'll send an announcement as soon as it's there. They'll know to download it and have it on their laptop for for the group work they'll be doing, or their computer, or many of them just print it out as well. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
We have a couple of people actually asking if you would be willing to share things like where you find skill sheet documents and more about the technology you use for your courses, as well as some of your materials on student skills.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm sharing them all. Okay, I want to give them all to you. And Anthony's going to, I think, talk to you about how you can
There you go.
access it. I've got, yeah, a ton of material, and I want to give it to all of you to help you and your students out.
great. And then before I hand it over to Anthony, we just had one more question, which I can answer. It's coming in from a lot of people. If we'll share a recording of the webinar, and if we will also share these presentation slides, and the answer to both is yes, we will share them. The email comes around 24 hours after the webinar, so expect to see it tomorrow. And
Yeah,
with
and I'll say I always like to give a gift for the webinar. My gift to you this time is that implementation guide from on Corex, because we had a lot of really talented people work on that. So if you're wondering about Corex and you want some direction, when Symphony shares those slides, I'd go out and check that out.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah.
Okay, Anthony, are you ready?
I am. Thanks, Sharon, so much for that presentation and for answering questions and for all your generosity. Yes, just to be clear, Sharon has been extremely open with sharing materials, some of which she developed and worked extremely hard on, with Deb and Rita on during this project, but a lot of material that she had before, and we're so appreciative of it. And I think you all will as well. So I'm going to speak just on a couple of things, sort of framing sort of how we approach this from the OpenStax side, and then just to give context of where you'll get material and the options you might have. Sharon obviously knows so much more and has been so dug in on this movement. Just to give you some background, at OpenStax, we had the college algebra and trig and pre-calculus textbooks. We had them for several years, written by Jay Abramson and supported by a number of other faculty. And then we also have the developmental math series, pre-algebra, elementary algebra, and intermediate algebra, written by Lynn Marisak and Marianne Anthony Smith. And we've seen, of course, a lot of opportunities for interplay between those two, as the CoRec movement turned into a more than a movement, but something that people are implemented, some places a mandate. And I want to kind of credit so many of our adopters who started working with this material already, right? And obviously Sharon was one of them who already had this in mind and was getting going. We've had a number of faculty create custom versions of our existing books using our platform, and obviously outside of it. And also our ecosystem partners, who many of you may know, WebAssign, XYZ, and Newton have been really speaking a lot about the need here for co-requisite support, and as they've been supporting faculty in that realm for quite some time, and doing it in many different ways, right? And providing custom solutions. So I'm going to talk about sort of how all those fit together, and mention, talk about the partner options as well. When we got started, we started talking to many of our adopters, started talking to Sharon, who's been deeply involved in both with us and the movement, and with many of the partners as well. And one of the key elements that came up was the need for flexibility. So that's a core element of what we have. The first thing we did, or sort of concurrently we did, was take a look at the developmental math books themselves. Some of you may know that we have just finished revising them. So I'm not going to focus on them today, but just so you know, pre-algebra, elementary algebra, and intermediate algebra have just revised. Those revisions focused almost exclusively on accuracy updates. The structure of the books is the exact same. And we were very, very careful. We know that sometimes when books revise, one of the issues is that when the problems numbers change, it's sometimes more trouble than it's worth for many faculty. So although we made literally thousands of changes to the book, and we have transition guides if anybody would like to see those, problem numbering remains the same. So if we had a problem that was just needed to be gone, we replaced it. We didn't just remove it, and we made edits. There might be a couple of exceptions here or there, but we really tried to keep everything preserved so that if you could have confidence that if you're using the book yourself and in a system, that all that will remain the same. And I think our partners were pretty happy about that as well. And the reason I'm starting there is because, as Sharon said, we are improving on the material from the intermediate algebra book in the CoRecs. So as you may know, when you go to an OpenStax book, you'll be able to get the textbook in its online view. That's the view we recommend, and the PDF view, and then another of other options as well. And then also, instructor and student resources. So that will be no different. So for example, as we're showing here, you could take a look at the table of contents. You could view it online, and you could you can see the PDF. We recommend for you and your students the online view because it is the most accessible in every means of the word. It is responsive for mobile devices so that students can use it on different platforms, different screen sizes, and so on. There are the opportunities to add notes and highlights. And then as you'll see there on the top right, once the student goes and adds those, they all roll up into like a study guide that's pre-made by their notes and their highlights. Students can print and so on. The other thing about these is accessibility in terms of compliance and inclusive design. These are the most readable by assistive devices, the most navigable. We do everything we can to make these WCAG compliant. And for example, not just the fact that the screen reader will read it and read the math. We do it in MathML so that it can be read, but the navigation is straightforward and students aren't, we know sometimes these pages get long, especially with all the problems at the end of them. And we try to make it as navigable as possible for students using all types of devices. And that helps, whenever we do that, anybody does that, it makes it better for generally everyone. Students can print from here, of course, as well. The PDF is available. They can use it. They can download it. You can download it as many times as you want and have it available. And then the books are available in print through our publishing partner Xanadu, and they could be ordered by your bookstore. We recommend, especially if you have a large adoption, getting some copies. We wouldn't suggest ordering for the entire adoption. Those will probably go unused with a free textbook. But sometimes having a few on hand in the bookstore is helpful for students who need that. They're also always available on Amazon, and students can get them there directly. So with that preamble, the reason I'm doing that is so you understand. So how does the CoRec offering fit into all that? So like Sharon said, she and her colleagues built skill sheets that will be placed at the beginning of every section of the college algebra textbook, and then as well with algebra and trig and pre-calculus. So when the student navigates, or you navigate to section whatever, 4.1, there will be the co-requisite section there. It will appear both in that web view and in the PDF, and it will be just like Sharon showed you. We'll have a couple of learning objectives. They will be clearly marked as co-requisite learning objectives so that there's no confusion between those learning objectives and the learning objectives in the college algebra content. So we just making it super clear. We know in reality, unfortunately, not every student digs deep into what's in the learning objectives, but we know that instructors can sometimes that's useful for them, and also as you're creating assessments and assignments and so on. So those will be available at the start of every section. They could be navigated to, and you could provide a link and just say, okay, before you do section 4.2, you'll do the CoRec section and so on. Now, we've talked about group work and collaborative exercises and the different contexts. And of course, now the fact that everything that you might have done in a classroom or a workshop or some sort of session before might not happen in the same way. So of course, we need to provide these in different means. So the co-requisite skill sheets and the very generously provided labs that Sharon offered will also be available as standalone downloads. And you'll be able to, so while they will be in the textbook, We understand also that these textbooks are just coming out now, and maybe you might be working with the other versions, the regular college algebra and algebra and trig and so on. So you can download the skill sheets and the labs in Word and in PDF format, and you'll be able to use them however you want. Thanks, Sharon. Really push for having as many options as possible. I will say we're trying to make even a third option where they're almost like completable, like a Google Form sort of thing. But I don't want to overpromise there. Just if anybody's on the call thinks that's a good idea or a horrible idea, we always love the feedback. But they'll be downloadable in both of those formats, and then from there, the students can access them. They could be printed. You could print them, hand them out, whatever. I know now we're not doing as many handouts as we probably did 6 months ago. So again, the point is options, and those will be available. We will make them available to the instructors and to the students, although we consider that most of this driving of that work will probably be done by the instructors. As Sharon emphasizes, this is useful for everyone, and we want to make the skill sheets and the worksheets and the labs available for students. We don't want to have any barriers or make it so that any instructors need to be an intermediary to receiving them. The other places that we'll provide them will be within our LMS cartridges. So OpenStax creates relatively, these aren't fully developed robust course cartridges, but as we're showing here on the screen, we provide course cartridges which basically contain the baseline material, the links to the textbook, some downloads of ancillaries like PowerPoints and so on. There aren't embedded gradable assessments. I just want to be clear on that. But there are links to the textbooks and material that hopefully makes it easy. We will put the material there as well. So if you download the course cartridges, it will all just be in there, and then you can tell your students access the files and so on if that makes it easier for you. We will have those right now on the screen. We're only showing course cartridges for Canvas and Blackboard. We'll also have them for D2L and Moodle, and those will be available in the fall. And probably for college algebra before the fall. We'll try to get them done by about August 15th. And then for the other books, they'll come out later. And I will go over the timeline for everything in a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm throwing a lot of information out. So we're gonna look forward to hearing questions. So just to recap, the skill sheets will be embedded directly in the textbook. They'll also be available, downloadable in a number of forms. They'll also be in the course cartridges. And finally, they'll be, and maybe I should have mentioned this first, they'll be available in the online homework systems partners that accompany the OpenStax textbook. So we've spoken to the WebAssign team, for example, and they're going to at first use these in their sort of natural state, make them providing some available option for downloading and instructors to use them. And then as the time goes on, it will be more and more integrated into the WebAssign, and we're assuming XYZ and Newton offerings as well, so that the assessments that are in the skill sheets can be taken directly within those platforms and so on. So it does take a little time to go from manuscript and textbook into those platforms. But once those are accomplished, all of the ways that you use those platforms now will still be available to be used for these books as well. They'll be fully embedded. The practice problems that are a part of the CoRec skill sheets will be embedded, and they are independently numbered, so that you'll be able to call those out specifically if you do want to assign them to students as a type of practice for the CoRec skills, or as a type of diagnostic or something like that. So again, just trying to provide as many options as possible. I'll mention the timeline on that. So the college algebra with CoRec support is coming out. We have a preview page now. It is coming out just at the beginning of August, and that will be the book with the Corequisite material embedded, and then pretty much right after that, or at the same time, the downloadable versions of the skill sheets and worksheets labs will be available. And then the algebra and trig with co-rec support, and the pre-calculus with co-rec support will arrive later, probably towards the end of the fall semester for potential use in the spring. Of course, if there is a lot of overlap between those books. So you know, the rate and the diligence with Sharon and her colleagues are working will actually make we'll have the material in manuscript ahead of time. So if anybody's very interested in seeing that for the algebra and trig content and so on, you know, we don't want to hold back. We would love to, you know, we'll put some caveats in front of it if it's coming in just for manuscript form. But if you really would like to see everything, you know, not to scare Sharon, but we'll probably have a lot of material to share with you by September-ish or something like that. So please just, we understand we're unveiling this, and that it's an interesting time right before the semester starts and then sort of through the semester. So we want to be as flexible as possible and make that clear to all of you. Before we turn to questions, I want to mention one other thing. Sharon mentioned, you know, take them, edit them, you know, manipulate them, and so on, which we of course totally support, which is one of the reasons we want to provide the Word document versions as well as PDFs and so on. You can have them. Everything will be CC BY, so you'll be able to do whatever you want with it. OpenStax is, you might have heard if you're an adopter, we're changing our customization options. We're trying to make them more accessible for customization by more faculty. Right now, a number of faculty, including co-rec teachers, notably UT San Antonio, have created co-rec versions of our books using our CNX platform. That platform is being retired, and instead we are moving to Google Docs. So the material, the textbook content itself, not just these skill sheets and worksheets that will be available in Word docs, but the textbook content itself will be available in a Google Doc format for you to make a, you know, kind of a copy out to make your own version, a derivative version, and then edit as you want using Google Docs. So that is, hopefully that makes it even more accessible, more customizable for you all. Of course, there are some nuances with that. When you put something into Google Docs and you're using a homework system, for example, you might need to change your links and so on. There's some nuances to that, but at least the ability to go ahead and make those edits will be available. And we do think that in Corequisites, it might be a pretty significant area to make those changes. The rollout of those Google Doc format textbooks will take place over the fall. We are actually seeking guidance and piloters and so on. So if anybody's very interested, you could feel free to ping us. You'll hear more about it as we go on. But I just want to make sure you know that in case you do customize or you're planning on doing it in the future. I think that is all I have in terms of sharing information. If you do, as we have on the screen here, if you go to navigate to our math subjects math page and go to the book details page for the college algebra co-rec support, you can see the PDF sample with the co-rec material embedded. And well, obviously, when we publish the book, you'll, just like we said, you'll see the PDF sample, the PDF version, the online view, and so on, and then the instructor resources and student resources will be added over time. So I am
great, Anthony. I'm glad you brought up that last point about Google Docs, because someone had actually asked about that. So you answered one of the questions preemptively. Let's see. First question I have here is there a plan or a timeline for statistics co-rec in the future?
Yes, there is. So there is a plan. I don't want to commit to a timeline yet, but we are interested in doing it. I will say that Sharon's been very vocal on herself on the need to do it. We've heard it from a lot of faculty. We know it's a need. So that would be the next one we would do is work on statistics version.
Great. I actually, piggybacking off of that, I have a few people asking if Sharon would be willing to share the same resources for statistics, and it sounds like if so, they would be part of the co-rec book. Is that correct?
Definitely, yeah. don't right now have as much for stats. I have taught probably 3 stat co-recs, and but not as much of the work that I've done with college algebra and pre-calculus. So I'll get right on it.
Great. It looks like a few people have questions around the books being standalone versus being part of the existing books. And Anthony, Sharon, if you could just clarify that one more time so that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, so let me start, and Sharon, if you have anything to add, certainly. So the existing college algebra, algebra and trig, and pre-calculus books will remain as is. They'll be maintained. You can use them. They'll be within the homework system platforms as well. And we'll take errata and make changes on them and everything like we normally do. So these versions, college algebra with correct support and the other books, will be separate versions with the material embedded. We're just doing that. We know it's an extra resource. We're just doing that in case, so if there's 2 situations at a school or different schools, there's enough options there. So these aren't overtaking those versions. So you could certainly, use the college algebra book as you have now and use the downloadable skill sheet work, downloads and formats like that if you would like. So that's how we're considering it. And then so now, of course, the content of the mainstream college algebra content is exactly the same. So anything that goes on regarding maintenance or importing or updates to that, we'll do in both areas. So if you submit an error, we get a suggestion, of course, we'd make the change, that sort of change in both places, but the books would be separate to start.
Great. Thank you for the clarification. It looks like someone is asking if Sharon can share her email address. It was on the first slide of her presentation, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat in case anyone would like to contact Sharon. Another question we have is for measuring the learning outcomes in the textbooks, do we use Bloom's taxonomy?
We have not tagged when we created the learning outcomes, we kept Bloom's taxonomy in mind, absolutely. We don't tag each assessment, in terms of Bloom's and how it affiliates with that learning objective. We don't have that included in sort of the natural scape of the book. We would be glad to share, a Bloom's mapping or sort of annotation. I don't know the best way to deliver it, but sort of how we view each learning objective in terms of which level of Bloom's it hits. I know sometimes there's interest in that. We could do that if somebody would like it. So we keep that in mind, but in terms of the, it's not like if you went into the textbook and you did problem 34, you would see the Bloom's taxonomy associated with that if that's the question you're asking.
Okay. Let's see. For someone who's wondering, about the possibility of maybe adopting this college algebra with co-requisite support book for this coming fall, but not being able to necessarily get it into their bookstore or into the textbook rental program in time. Anthony, do you have any suggestions? I know you highlighted quite a bit about the online version of the book.
Absolutely, yes. So this, one of the benefits of OER is that it is available, before, during, and after class. So you can link to it from day one, right? As soon as it publishes, and students can also download it as many times as possible. So in terms of having your students have it in time, you would be able to have it on your syllabus or within your online course, your course cartridge or so on, and the students have access to it. In terms of getting the textbooks into the bookstore, if you did want them, and I understand that decision would have to be soon, and the bookstore would need to order, of course, very soon if they were going to get books onto shelves, especially with probably the way things are going this semester. in terms of, social distancing or availability of students to do pickups and so on. I know schools are doing it very differently. One thing you might want to consider is if you did want print copies early, to go ahead and order the regular college algebra version, and then supplement it with these other versions. Now, you would need to potentially
Yeah.
print them or just leave that to the students. But one thing is, all of this, everything that's on our site that you get from us, downloadable worksheets, the textbooks themselves, the PDFs, that's all free. Obviously, the print textbooks cost. So, but if you went ahead and ordered the college algebra textbook into your bookstore and then told students, okay, here's these other resources you can use, the bookstore would charge, obviously, but the rest of the materials would be free. So hopefully that would take the edge off of any cost concern.
Fantastic. The last little, I'll just cluster these questions together. They're on the efficacy of co-requisite courses. A couple of people are wondering, if there's any data on the success rates that students have in future courses after taking a co-rec, and like if there's any particular benefit to having a separate co-rec and regular class. And I was wondering if Sharon and Anthony, if you could kind of speak to that as a closing note and kind of, a reminder as to why OpenStax has decided to develop these texts in particular.
Yeah, I would. I'd probably refer you to the Charles A. Dana Center through UT Austin Math Pathways website to look at the research. I know they were looking at how students do calculus and beyond who had come through the co-requisite model. I think that's, information that we're all interested in and is being gathered. I know that when I was there, I was looking at some, just an article from Uri Treisman about a co-requisite to calculus that he's doing through UT Austin, which is really interesting to me, and writing this trig content. I'm like, oh my gosh, my calc students could really make good use of this. And I think that really all students can use this material. If you teach in a flipped environment, this material could be meaningful as the work that students do before they, come into class with you. So, I don't have a percentage to give you right off the top of my head. I would go out and search to tell you. I know that we're hoping to see these improvements in graduation rates, and they do seem to be creeping up district-wide and statewide. But it takes some time. Our students mostly self-advise. And so, as I said, it's sometimes a tough sell to convince a student to take 2 math classes at once, a 5-hour plus chunk in their schedule. But we're working on it. We're continuing to make progress all the time with it. Did you have something to add, Anthony, on that? Or
I think you're by far the expert on it. I emphasize too, again, with the Dana Center's done great work. We've been starting up some collaboration with them. They're very interested to see how this goes, and how a deep pairing of OER with co-requisite work, how that all fits together, and the access that might provide. But I know also that the models of implementation vary, so much, and we did have a webinar with them a couple of weeks ago, and I would say about half the questions were about logistics, and that obviously plays into the efficacy as well, is how are you doing short sections, or how we're dividing up students, what type of diagnostics are going in and out, and so on. So it seems to be a lot of factors, but it seems like the work is ongoing to gather that data.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing, that our placement And it was very timely, us going to multiple measures, considering, you know, a student can't walk into a campus and take a placement exam. And we've got a whole group of, you know, students graduating from high school, not being able to take the, you know, the ACTs and the SATs that they had used in the past, that I'm really glad we went to multiple measures when we did to, you know, get students into their appropriate class.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharon. I'm actually really glad that you did bring up the Dana Center. I had totally spaced. I don't know if we're having too many webinars or what, but we actually have a webinar coming up with them again on August 4th. And I put the link in the chat for anyone who would like to register for that. And it's up on the screen as well. And I think that'll be a great opportunity for all of you to hear from them directly, ask them all of your questions. That webinar is going to be very heavy on the Q&A session, and we'll have some short micro presentations at the beginning. So I'm glad that you brought that up because I had totally forgotten. Anthony and Sharon, thank you so much for everything today, for sharing these fantastic presentations and walkthroughs of our resources. I think that we've answered all of the questions that we have here, but if there's any lingering questions, we would be happy to connect with all of you via email.
Yes, and just so you know, I have been trying to go through and answer some of them via the platform, but we capture all of them and we can follow up. We can follow up after for anybody if we don't get to it here.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all for joining us. We're out of time for today, so we're going to go ahead and end the webinar, but I just wanted to say how much we appreciate you for taking this hour out of your day to hear from us and chat with us and ask all of your questions.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sharon, and thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Thanks, Symphony.
Thank you, Symphony.
Thanks.